Good afternoon and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These are live every Friday here at 1 p.m. or 1:10 or whatever it is right now, both here in the building and live online on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. So whether you are in Bristol or far away, you can join in. My name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio's creative technologist. I'm a white man with long brown hair, a bit bald on top, wearing a purple jumper and blue jeans. These lunchtime talks are part of our Open Studio Friday offer. Every Friday we throw open the doors of the studio and offer you the chance to spend some time in the space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. The talks cover everything from innovative research in the fields of creativity and technology to projects in progress, things that are in need of feedback, questions and curious minds. Especially big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio. Any people who are new to the studio throw their hands in the air? Welcome to all of you. For the rest of you, you've heard this bit before. So why don't you get on your social media and start sharing the link to this talk? Tell everybody what's going on. So what is the Pervasive Media Studio? We are a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding, product development to performance art. We're a collaboration between Watershed, the University of West of England and the University of Bristol. And we're a home for embryonic ideas, research and development and the building of new companies, and we're a meeting space for the creative and the commercial industries. We offer studio space, offering desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for our residents in a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space for people to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. Quick bit of housekeeping, very quick because we are running behind time. Please do feel free to move around, make some noise. Grab a glass of water from the kitchen, don't use the microwave, makes noise. We have a quiet space just in here. If you're feeling like you need to take a break at any point, just pop in there. Fire exits are at either end of the studio. We do not have a fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm goes, that is real, please leave. We will direct you if needed. Accessible toilets and baby change are located in the corridor just to the left of the kitchen. Our talk today is coming in remotely, but there will be Q&A at the end of the talk. So for those of you watching online, you can pop your questions in the YouTube chat or tweet them at PM Studio UK. Jade at the back here will pick them out and ask them for you. If you're in the building, you can just stick your hand up. You can get news on all of our future talks by going to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, all very consistent branding. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker today. In this lunchtime talk, Polinations design director Carl Robertshaw discusses the Trigger Collective's latest project, an epic multi-artform project created in response to Colston's fall, greening cities and gardening. Carl is a transdisciplinary designer and artist with over 25 years of experience working at the intersection of performance, engineering and fine art. Amongst others, he's worked with Björk, Kylie Minogue, Hussein Chalayan, Take That, Peter Gabriel, Anoni, Coldplay editors and Ellie Goulding. And working alongside Bristol-based arts organisation and studio alumni Trigger, Carl was instrumental in developing the Hatchling, potentially the world's largest non-mechanical flying puppet, which will be leading the procession for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee this June. I've talked enough. We're behind schedule, so I'm going to hand over
to Carl. I wanted to start with talking about the Hatchling, which thank you for the introduction just there, where this was a project devised through Trigger, by Trigger, and this took several years to come to fruition. It started with Andrew Buell, who spent time in China, and her view on her experience of living in China and working in China, and obviously people in China and how they view the West and vice versa when she came back to the West, obviously to England, and the view of the East. So this idea of crossing over in terms of community, we wanted to develop a project about this flying dragon as a metaphor. It started off very small as a project, and the ambition grew in scale and ambition, where Trigger worked hard to then to get the project commissioned through the Arts Council and eventually with the Arts Council and Mayflower 400. We went through a series of prototyping and small scale models to develop this, and this was no small feat of engineering in itself. We think it's the world's largest non-mechanical puppet. It's quite hard to quantify or to qualify that, but it is large and it is multifaceted in many different ways. The project involves community, diversity, participation, and metaphor and spectacle. So it crosses over from being several things all at the same time. And obviously scale is important, but also the metaphor is important and the concept behind it. So it's not just an object that you come and view like in a procession kind of sense. It's something that you take part in. We had a lot of participatory community groups, and it was about this creature, this alien, looking back at the city and the response of the people, of their response to this thing, as it were. So we had a lot of satellite parts to the project, and we had a lot of traineeships through the project as well. So this covered many different facets. This was a large puppet that roamed the streets of Plymouth and went through a sort of series of interactions in the city during the day on the Saturday and then the Sunday, and then what it did was culminate in walking up to Plymouth Hoe, where it went through a transformation, where the idea was that it then launched as a flying kite with a wingspan of over 21 meters. We had a crew of 27 kite flyers with over 1,000 years experience. We had 36 well-trained puppeteers. We went through a program of a month of rehearsals in Plymouth. The whole project was built in Plymouth locally, and the expertise came from everywhere and was brought to Plymouth. So it became effectively a homegrown project for Plymouth, in Plymouth, and by Plymouth as well. There were many challenges with the project as a whole, where we obviously, as I said, we started in 2015 with the idea, and this grew, but then being commissioned for Mayflower 400, which was 2020, obviously that landed in lockdown. So we had a year of a postponement effectively through that. So how many events, as we know, obviously fell by the wayside, couldn't stay alive. And the challenge for Trigger here was to keep the project alive, to stay in touch with the stakeholders, to keep everybody on board, and also to help realise this project through to the fruition, to culmination. And then obviously through the rehearsals, we were in Plymouth, where it was probably the highest sort of hotbed, as it were, for COVID at the time as well. So the programme of rehearsals, keeping puppeteers in groups or pods, if you like, separated through rehearsal, and so nobody could transmit COVID to each other. We had a programme of testing and so on. So this was a massive challenge with the large group of people we were rehearsing with, to get through a month of rehearsals, to get to the day before the show, where we had then unfortunately there were the mass shootings in Keyham in Plymouth. So we decided to postpone the show. Then we had everything ready to go, but it was a really sad decision to make at the time. But we decided to then put the show on again in 2 weeks afterwards. This created more poignancy for the project, and certainly amplified the resonance of it. So this transformation sequence at the end of the show on the Sunday was like a release for the town and the city. So it almost it did bring people together, and it part of the some of the messages that we received were amazing, and it was sort of based around the feeling that the heart of the community had been brought back after it had been pulled apart by the shootings. this continues to have a life afterwards, and as we said before, that the dragon will lead the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in June this year. So it's got a life afterwards. So this idea of the whole thing, the structure itself packs down and can be transported and can have life afterwards, a legacy, if you like, of going on to other shows. What this does was provide the background and the basis and the proving ground, as it were, for Trigger and for us as a group to develop a new project. And this is where we come to Polinations. And through lockdown, people became lockdown gardeners, and we got to hear birds sing. There was no transport. We got to walk in the park. We got to connect more with the outside world than we did before. We had more time to think and reflect. What we started to do was to build the idea of a project with that ambition and vision based on the Hatchling, with a multidisciplinary view, where it made connections with the community and with a large diverse audience as well. This is where we wanted to enable community to realise itself as well, in the same way that the Dragon did in the project with Plymouth, and also have mass participation. So this being a large horticultural artwork, in terms of that was the idea, but we didn't know what this would be at the very start. It certainly wasn't called Polinations, but we started to develop the idea around simply connecting people with plants. During this sort of idea generation, then there is the toppling of Colston statue, and this was in the middle of 2020. And this resonated, of course, through Black Lives Matter and our sort of global questioning about who we are, and the existential questions of what we're about, and obviously divisive politics at the time, and following Brexit, and sort of serious, large questions that we're asking ourselves. The project was developed sort of in the context of things like Ashley Banjo taking the knee on Britain's Got Talent, as we said, the BLM protests and the rising awareness, Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You and the success of that series, and as I said, the divisiveness of politics and social media and increasing feeling of unease amongst minority groups. Add to that as well the context of lockdown gardening and our shared experience hearing birds, and where there was no traffic and no noise, no noise pollution. We all spent more time in parks and outdoors, increasing in-home gardening. As I said, the city gardens and tiny forests were coming into public's awareness as well. And obviously we're creating a space to consider global warming, extinction events, and pollution and energy consumption at this point. I think this was a common experience for most people through definitely Britain, but around the world. What we then come to is this kind of simple Venn diagram idea, where we illustrate what the seed of this project might be, and how we might grow it. So what is it for England and Britain, and where do we locate these themes, and how does this overlap into the same space? What is the question here? How do we make it personal? How do we make it impactful at the same time? How do we make it this for community? How do we make it diverse? How do we make it celebratory? And how do we make it about ecology and raise awareness? During this period of development as well, where we've got James Wong talking about colonialism, in his Twitter feed, in his blogs and Instagram, and also his Guardian articles, the story of plants in the background. He received a massive backlash, which included death threats for discussing the colonial background of our common plants. And this is something that was resonant. And obviously this is a touch point. And how do we deal with the conversation? How do we provide a platform for conversation like this to happen in a way that is an art form, but also in terms of accessibility as well? So we were, I think, Angie and Trigger were very clever in organising a residency during in the gap in lockdown in December 21, in this week, and we went on a residential retreat to be in the same room together, to then start to open this idea up of what it could be. This is with the key core team of Trigger, myself, Sash from This Architects, with horticultural experts, and this was with the idea of working towards being shortlisted for what's now called Unboxed 2022. That was the kind of goal, to be commissioned by them, but also with the idea that if we don't get commissioned by them, we'll still realise the project for ourselves, by ourselves. The exploration and the interrogation around the themes and ideas was really a process focused on expanding out a concept, honouring it, and then blowing it open again and repeating this process. So it's a case of going through a process which takes you on a journey in effectively a straight line, but what you're doing is taking a series of what might seem separate ideas, and where are the links, where are the connection points, what does that start to look like, delving into that, finding the common ground, as it were, finding the ideas, and then interrogating that, stripping away the things that aren't necessary, and then taking that core kernel, if you like, to excuse the puns, take the core kernel and then to carry that forwards, and then start blowing that open, and then going through that same process. So it's a kind of repeating cycle, but it's not looping back on yourself. What it is, it's developing and kind of nurturing, and in a gardening sense, kind of sort of tending to it, pruning it back, letting it grow, let it grow new shoots, and then kind of pruning it back again. So it's kind of a healthy development process. I've got another pun here. What it does is it produces a strong rooted idea. In this, what we do have is this brilliant tagline, which relates to people and plants. It's very true, is that diversity leads to stronger cultures and ecologies. This is proven. We can see this around us. Those of us that live in cities that are diverse. I live in London, where, in a very diverse neighbourhood, and I know that it's stronger for the diversity. We formed a team around this premise specifically, building on people's talents in the team as well, so that we bring that experience of a lived experience through the specific fields of people's expertise, but also their backgrounds as well, and their cultural backgrounds. This fits directly with the STEAM brief, which is set by Unboxed, and STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering and Arts and Mathematics. So the team for Polinations is built up around that. So this makes it multidisciplinary in of itself. It means that it's a large, broad, wide team. That brings challenges, but it also brings a wide diversity and series of voices to the project as well. So we can bounce ideas off each other, we can cross-pollinate, we can build strength from that range of experience and viewpoints. On the next slide, what we have here is this nugget of information that we discovered during that residency, where 80% of garden plants are labelled non-native. So this is to do with the naming of things as well. So linking back to Colston statue and how we name things, how we see things, what are we doing in terms of putting things on a pedestal, how are we owning things. So here, this is an illustration that depicts a few plants. For example, on the right, picking out things like the horse chestnut that's from northern Greece or Albania, the dahlia from Mexico, and the rose, which we can trace its roots back to it being native in Asia, and the apple from Kazakhstan in Central Asia. And we think of these as maybe, typically English, typically British. We see them everywhere and we sort of take them for granted almost, but there's a long story here, and the story is actually of people as well. So how do we bring that, the sort of premise of the project, and the question that we've been asking ourselves through the process is, how do we bring these two things into alignment? How do we do that and bring these stories to life for people? And what we have done is gone through a process, and we've landed on this mass horticultural artwork idea, where we have a big, effectively a city centre grown garden, a co-grown garden. It's co-sown by the community, and this is a program whereby which trigger, on the success of the Hatchling project, working with all those community groups and running a program through school groups as well with an education pack, bring, start work early on, way before the installation happens, to then start work on bringing people into the idea of this, so that there is ownership when we come to site, where they have ownership, where they literally bring their plants and co-plant the artwork itself. What we have thought about is this being a space for many different things. So it's multidisciplinary in its scope, and it's multidisciplinary in its vision. In early 2021, we secured the commission as to be one of the 10 unboxed teams with this idea for this mass horticultural artwork. So we managed to meet our goal with this idea, and it was a lot of hard work. It was enjoyable, but yeah, we're really behind it, and we didn't have tested many different ideas, but this was the strongest one, and it's through that process of interrogation that you sort of build a stronger idea. As I said, this is multidisciplinary, so then the ambition of the project is to make this accessible with low barriers of entry. We want to create a place for everyone, for learning, for reflection, for celebration. The vision is to see a transformation in that city centre, having people see a familiar space changed. Included from the very start is our ambition for this to be the most sustainable project we can possibly make it as well. So these things are at the very start of the project, and they're very much at the heart of it now. So we've kept hold of those. Those are very strong and very dear to the kind of vision of the space. What you see here is the central clearing, where there's space for performance, it's space to visit, it's a space to reflect, there's scent, there's tactility, you feel like you're enclosed in a space, but yet you're outdoors. It changes the sense of being in a town square where it's non-linear, so it's not surrounded by buildings. What you have is that elevation, that viewpoint where you look up, and being in a city centre looking up, most of us in cities don't look up very often. It's the tourists that look up who are seeing it for the first time. So this idea of something familiar, a space that's familiar, and seeing it anew and looking up and having that optimistic, that psychological lift of raising your chin and eyes to the sky. The next one is another view, another render of the idea of the centre of the installation, where people can go through an experience, and it's different things at different times through the programme of events. So we have quiet time and we have theatrical and raised sort of dynamics, if you like. So there's forest bathing, it's a space for live and recorded music and soundscapes. There's different times of the day, it will have different sort of programmed interventions going on. There'll be speakers in the trees, there'll be lights, there'll be chants for quiet time, there'll be talks from performers and speakers. There'll be a sensory-led activity program as well, specifically directed at touch, smell, sound, vision and taste. This is really important for us because what we want to do is to make this for everybody. So I think by making it accessible, it means it's not exclusive, it's inclusive for everybody. What we have is a learning program and with co-grow groups as well, and that has started now, so that schools are being engaged and community groups are being engaged now to grow plants ready to bring to site in September. It involves theatre and costume workshops, so we include carnival and drag costume designers and makers who are very experienced, and what they're doing is bringing a level of colour, experience and a chance for people to discover their authentic selves as well through the workshops. It's also a place for reflection and celebration. So this idea of reflection, and it's a quiet space like you would have in a forest or a garden where you would have a chance to be quiet and you can just switch off. So to take a city centre square and turn it into a place where there are meadows and grass banks and low-lying soundscapes as well means it's a chance to reflect. And then we have the sense of colour through flowers and celebration, and this idea of a burgeoning sort of blooming celebration comes through. This is the daytime, and what we do is transform it at night time, where we have a sunset cycle that moves through, so we start to become more theatrical at night, where it starts to create spectacle. And this will happen every night, where we have a shift in light conditions. We get to play with light in unexpected ways. We've got an amazing lighting designer who's working with us, and this becomes more theatrical in an otherworldly experience, drawing on the ways that insects see the world. So this is where we get to change the light levels and perceive things in different ways, and think about imaginative stories of in gardens with fairies and nymphs and poetry and things like that. And this is where we can bring performance into the space as well. Also, we have a dynamic running through the programme, which we've always wanted to kind of have celebration and a kind of uplift moment, and drawing on this nugget of inspiration from the discovery that seeds can go ballistic, where the pressure can build in the seed pod, and the seeds can project the seeds far, the pod can project its seeds far and wide. So it is literally kind of an explosion. So this, in terms of celebration and dispersing the whole installation, this becomes a point at the end of the whole installation that gives us the kind of metaphor for dramatic celebration, dispersal and legacy. I hope I'm not going too fast. So this is a sneak peek at a very, very early render. So this is not to be taken as real, but it gives you an idea and a flavour for the kind of ballistic seed party feel, if you like. So it's evocative more than figurative. It involves costume, theatre, party, celebration, music, colour and movement. The idea is to bring together the idea of pride, holly, mela, carnival, all in one combined event, and celebrate people's difference and diversity as a collective rather than in silos. So it's a way to cross over and break down boundary, and in the way that we've devised the installation, where we'd have low barriers of entry, but also we don't have square corners. It's all about flow, and it's about blurring the boundaries between landscape and pathway. Also, we think about this in terms of culture and people, which is about crossover and making things richer rather than dilution. We'll move on to the last slide, which is the final render, which is the most up-to-date vision of our design and the viewpoint of what we're doing in Birmingham in Queen's Square, Victoria Square. The idea is that this is for everybody. This is for people to experience locally and to be a place of destination. It has the wow factor, and it also has the sensitivity to have at the heart of it plants and flowers that provide story. In the site, we have the idea that we're going to bring out the stories of certain plants, like the apple and the fern and the tulip, pansy, for instance, and rose, that all have backstory that go through history and time, that connect to people, that have multi-layered stories, that help to talk to our past, our colonial past, what the questions are, but also celebrate where we are now, and to raise the idea of, to raise the questions, but also to be a talking point, and to be a point of interaction as well, and do it artistically in a way that is joyful and it's not lecturing. And that's the whole idea with the project as a whole. We're also going to have this existing online through the website, and specifically through a specially created app as well, where you get to answer a series of psychological questions to create your unique flower, which you can then share online, and you can plant anywhere in the world. And that then can help, what you can do is choose to pollinate with other plants and then create new flowers, which will hopefully create this mass online worldwide super garden. This is all to do with how we perceive ourselves. So the questions are to do with, as I said, psychological questions. So they're to do with how we feel and how we view ourselves. So this is very much at the heart of the project, and how we view ourselves. And we hope that this has a legacy far beyond the installation itself. We have a series of traineeships. So every creative lead in the project has a trainee assigned to them. We've gone through a series of interview and sign-up programs for finding the candidates for them. So we have direct traineeships connected to each department, but also we have chance for workshops, and through the workshops that we're going to have on site as well, we get to then talk directly with people. So this is not a kind of statue or a lecturing or a kind of talking to people. It's very much a conversation between people, and people bringing their experience to the table. And for people who have part of the project from our side, for instance, coming to it and having a dialogue together. The plants themselves will be distributed via the council. The trees, the large architectural trees, go into storage with the idea that these tall as well. And as I said, this has the lowest carbon footprint as possible. And that's what we're logging and qualifying through the project all the way through as well. And we're working with a sustainability officer consultant to log all of it, including our travel, our online and digital footprint as well. I think that's everything that I can say at the moment, and it'd be great to take any questions. Thank you.
I'm not sure where I should look. Thank you, Carl. And particularly thank you for putting up with our little delay there at the start. Does anyone here in the room have questions? Stick your hand in the air. We got one here. We're going to send your roving mic down to you. Okay.
Well, that was a great talk. I like the solar, the kind of like more colourful version of that, and something that might be happening in the UK. With the connection that you were making between...
Sorry, can you hold the mic a little closer to your head?
Yeah.
It's a terrible mic, I'm
the
sorry.
connection that you were making between diversity in real life of human beings and with plant life, and like the correlation with that, I agree with that. But that also kind of goes the other way. You know, obviously there's disputes that happen within both of them as well. So in terms of when you actually create, what I wanted to know is, in terms of when you actually create it, have you already done some sort of a test that you know every single one of those plants are actually going to be able to correlate with each other, and there isn't kind of a one little kind of just some sort of a failure in either production or like how it sustains itself? And if there isn't like a test that you could do beforehand, is there kind of like a narrative explanation that you'd be able to give, in terms of, I'm thinking about a child that comes from a particular culture, one of these plants is meant to represent where they come from and part of their narrative, and then that's the one plant that can't actually survive in the environment?
So we're not being literal, I think, is the short answer. I think we've got we're working with horticultural experts who are designing the site, and we've got 4,500 live plants going into the site, and we've been working through this with Advili Richards, who's a plant historian, whom we've been talking to her. She's been informing us of many plant histories. The 8 iconic plants that we have going into the site that are the sculptures, for instance, we've well researched those. So this is about the making the artistic link between their background, the site itself in Birmingham, between people and the backgrounds of where they come from and what cultures they've come through as well. And this is where we have citizens' democracy debate in the middle weekend, which is where we have a platform to debate the politics and the background of this as well as a platform. And for instance, take the apple, where we have the idea of the travel and transport, for instance. So it's a series of plaques that are around the site that you can do breast rubbings. School groups are going to come, and they've got they have what you call it, phrases on them that help to illustrate and talk to the background and the story and the travel that apples have been through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so effectively you're saying that you've just got a lot of science beforehand, and you're not anticipating that any one of the plants should actually kind of die within the time that you're expecting it to be in the city centre and flourishing and looking beautiful and the rest of it.
Yes, so we've got, so as I said, 4,500 live plants are going into the site, and we've got half as many in reserve to come in. And we do have about 100 volunteer gardeners, I think, who are going to be working on site as well. So yeah, I think there's 3 watering times during the day as well. So the real plants will be well cared for. Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions in the room or online? Well, Carl, I had a question actually. I wanted to ask about you. You mentioned a lot about the sustainability, and I was wondering, how do you approach that when you're dealing with something which is such a like intense festival experience, and it is naturally going to produce quite a lot of waste?
Yes, it's a really big question, and it's something that is very it's a very difficult subject to approach, and there's a high level of not conflict, but sort of it's very easy to get it wrong. It's very hard to get it right as well. I think probably an example of this is the large architectural trees. They're freestanding, so they're on a base with a ballast, and there's been a lot of work gone into what the ballast is going to be, and this is tons of weight. So we've gone from are we able to anchor these into the pavement, the ground itself, and what that can be, which would mean that we don't need ballast. So that then means we don't have a lot of material on the ground that need to weigh these down. That wasn't an option. So then we had to look at how we can add tons of weight to hold these trees stably. And we were looking at steel plate, And then we were looking at concrete and gravel. And of course, there's a time commitment to installing and taking the installation away. So gravel ballast isn't an option because it takes too long to shovel it in and out. And we can't put them in bags because then that would mean that the landscape would be built up too high. If it's poured concrete, is that done off-site? And what would that be? That means that the installation is quick, but what's the carbon footprint of that? And that the equivalent that it would be flying the whole team to New York and back 14 times. So we then had to think about how can we not use concrete precast. So what we have are crane ballast weights that already exist that are hired in, and what we have is sandbags that then go in and around the void, the space, that help to create the landscape. So this then reduces our carbon footprint on the project massively. It also means that we're not creating any new material. What we're doing is using existing material as well. We've also been consulting with an expert who brought in the bag charge as well. And she now works for a company that is looking at circular resource. So where, for instance, where we have resource of plastic in the world, for instance, so the material that already exists, we don't need to produce new material. What we do is recycle and reuse, so it stays in the loop. So packaging, that's very much the case for material with costume, for instance. So we're looking at using existing fabrics that already exist or that are going to be thrown out and using those and then reusing them again. So this idea that everything that is live on site is then given a future life. We don't just throw things in the bin. What we do is then store them and then we reuse them in terms of their physical, things that are going to remain that we're building, for instance. What we do is give them as long a life as possible. If they're not, then they're reusable. And for instance, the large architectural trees as well will use recycled steel, which in itself can be recycled too. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, very thoroughly. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? We've probably got time for one or two. Zoe and then Jess.
Thank you. That was really interesting to hear, like how in depth you've been thinking about your environmental strategy, and I'd really love to hear more about like how you're measuring your digital impacts. You mentioned that earlier about measuring the digital impact of the project. I'd really like to hear about like the approach to that.
I'm probably not the best person to answer that because I'm not so digital savvy, but Helen, who is our sustainability consultant, she's measuring all of this as well. So we are very aware of the digital impact, and also the design company who are developing the app and the website as well. So I think two things that are in mind is that the website has a life. It's not, it doesn't stay up beyond the life of the project itself. Also, we've been talking about the idea of the app and the super garden, this idea that we grow our own online digital plants within the app, as it were. Those then fade out almost like ghosts, so that it's not like it's going to just sit there and have a kind of non-existence, as it were, online and just kind of be left. We're looking at how we can wind it down as well, so that this kind of has a life cycle, in the sense of, trees lose their leaves and they draw back their energy. That idea of this exists in a set amount of time, not in a sort of never-ending sort of, you just leave the kind of the device on, as it were. What we do is purposefully we're going to switch it off.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
You said when you were talking about the Hatchling about how Plymouth had kind of shaped the project or been a real part of it, and it sounds like you're taking a similar approach with this one being in Birmingham. If this toured or if it went somewhere else, would you you know, would the new location like change the project?
Absolutely. I think the kernel of the project is it relates to many people in many places, so it's very transferable. But the actual physical form and the idea will be based around you know, different people, different culture, local local questions, local concerns. I think it's very much about place making. It's about legacy. It's about what is needed, what is being asked for, what are the concerns within that space and time that makes it relevant, what's going to have the most impact, and what's going to make it be most effective. I think in its way that it can impact change in a place as well. So it's not voyeuristic and it's not helicoptering in an idea. What it's doing, it's working with people and space where it's envisaged specifically for that time, so that it has resonance. So it kind of so it feels part of the kind of environment, and the yeah, it has resonance. I hope
We
that
got, I
answers
think,
it.
one. Sorry, Carl. We got, I think, one question at the back, and then I think online.
Hiya. I'm
Hello.
interested in what your approach is going to be in terms of the sort of security of the space, especially at night. Is it gated? Is there going to be like a big security presence? Because thinking about certain areas in Bristol where there's been sort of these transformation projects, regeneration projects, and it can lead to some really like difficult sort of conflicts about who's welcome, who isn't, homeless presence, all of these types of things. And where in central areas where there's a lot of heavy drinking, a lot of, you know, what's your approach going to be to security and to
Very much.
inclusivity?
It's a really good question, because the idea for the project is that it is low barriers of entry, that we don't have a fence, that we don't have gates, that it's not exclusive, and we don't have barriers. So it's not like an art gallery with a boundary, you know, that you're separated from the artwork. It's very much you touch it, that you're part of it, that it's part of you, that there is this feeling of ownership through it, that it's yours. And how do we do that? That's been a big big discussion. How we've solved that is that what we do is have sort of we create natural boundary, as it were. So it's done through the perimeter, for instance, around the back edge, which is forest. So we have trees. So within that, there are mirror panels that help to reflect the forest back to itself. So what we're doing is creating a barrier, but not a wall, as it were. So it's not a fence, and it's not something that you're feeling like you're separated from. It's very much there. You can touch it, and you can sort of get right up close to it. But it's a living thing. It's a what do you call it? Like a hedge, for instance, rather than a fence. And we will have security on site. They're going to be there the whole time. We have, I mentioned the gardeners and the volunteers. We also have, I think we've got other volunteers as well who are going to be maintaining the landscape as well as the plants as well. So not just gardeners, but actually the site maintenance as well, because a lot of it does need looking after. It is a city centre, and we have a nighttime shift, which will be this theatrical time zone, as it were. But the idea is that it's also live 24 hours a day as well. So this is an idea where it is there. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, you might be coming home from the club, for instance, but you know, it still is a live site. So this is where it is kind of, we do have our chaperones on site, so security guards who we're not going to have them in bright yellow, you know, looking like security guards. We're going to play that down, so they will be, you know, different from public, but also very much approachable. we did this on the Hatchling with the security guards there, and what we did was give them pink over their black, kind of, they look like bouncers at a nightclub, so to soften them up we gave them the pink Hatchling bags, which automatically made them much more approachable, and we saw that, you know, with public approaching them rather than staying at a distance and then being like the police, almost sort of this kind of force, as it were, that was as a kind of authority. You know, breaking that boundary down is really important.
I think we have time for one very quick question from online.
So there's a few comments just saying that it was great to hear about your consideration for digital footprint, and another one saying that the website adds a really nice artistic element, and that it was a great question about nighttime security, and that's really important. Then someone asked, what's your favourite tree?
Whoa. Gosh, what's my favourite tree? I live near a park and it's got to be a weeping willow, and actually in the site we've got one of our iconic plants is the willow, and it's going to be a seat that's for reflection. And if I'm right in my history, that the weeping willow, it's called a weeping willow because it often grows by, we associate it with being by a river and poetry, but also I think it was misinterpreted in the Bible, I think. Don't quote me on this, but this is where the weeping side of it comes in. So it comes in with sorrow, but it's just a beautiful tree that moves in the wind. So this idea of flow. So yeah, so this seat is going to be to do with reflection and psychology, sort of like a chaise lounge in the site. So you'll be able to lie down and converse with somebody else on this willow bench. So again, it links in with garden furniture in an artistic sense. So we're sort of reinterpreting or linking artistically the themes around the willow and how it might be used as a building material, but also as a poetic expression as well, through poetry and verse and literature in a form that hopefully holds that story together. And we will have signage that will have a poem that's the ode to the willow that's being written by a poet, and we'll have signage there that's low key, that you will get to go into the background, and then on the website there'll be a much broader, much wider story connected to this, explaining and giving more history and background to it as well. So yeah, so I think that's a long answer to the question of what's my favourite tree. I think that's my favourite tree today. I think if you ask me in a week's time, it'll be something different. But yeah, the willow's so beautiful in the way it moves.
All right, thank you very much, Carl. I think that is all we have time for. But Carl, can you remind people when they can actually go and see this?
So we start off in Edinburgh in August, and I have to just quickly, it's in the middle of August, and then we then go to Birmingham, and we start in Birmingham on, I think, on the 2nd of September, and we culminate on the 18th, I think the 18th of September as well. So we're there for 9 days, I think, in Edinburgh, and for 17 or 18 days in Birmingham.
Thank you very much. Now, before you all go, I know we're running a little behind time, but we have a couple of announcements. Makeshift Media Studio at Watershed, first Tuesday of every month. First one is going to be next week on the 3rd of May from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. If you are a freelancer interested in climate or community activism, please do check out our Futurist Collective project. Details are in the project section on our studio website. If you're here in person today, you can also grab a chat with one of our Futurist Collective associates. I think this is Anders here. Okay, you can grab a chat with Anders. We only have one Futurist Collective associate today to find out about the support on that. There's also a social event as part of this year's Festival of Nature on the 14th of June. Details on the event page. And finally, as well as Open Studio Friday, next week we are hosting First Friday, which is our monthly social event, open to anyone. It takes place in the studio and online from 5 to 6 p.m. people behind Container Magazine, one of whom is me, will be on hand to answer questions about what we do. And we're going to have a remote control wheelie bin, so please don't miss out on that. If you want to stick around in Hot Desk today, find out more about what we do, then please come find one of the studio team. Studio team, hands in the air. Yeah, there we go. We'll be happy to help. If you're watching online, stick us an email, studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today. I know we've been taking a bit more of your time than you might have liked. We'll see you all here today, same time, same place next week. All right.
Cool.